We'll turn to our program today, finally. We'll get around to you once point, Bill. Our board host I'd like to introduce at our head table is Jim Zarin, member of the Board of Governors and attorney with Stoll, Reeves, Boley, Jones, and Gray. He will have the privilege of asking our first question. The second question will be asked by George Boudreau of the Science and High Tech Standing Committee. And then, as we usually do, we open the questions up to speakers in our audience after those first two prime the pump. It does give me particular pleasure to have as my last introduction be Bill Scott, the fourth and final speaker of our Blockbuster January of political leaders. We've already heard the state of the city, the state of the state, the potential of the port, and now the economy, stupid. There's no better speaker, better equipped than our guest today, Bill Scott. Not only is he the director of Oregon's Economic Development Department, but he brings to the position his Oregon roots, first-class educations at Princeton and Cornell, executive positions with PacifiCorp, and masterminding Neil Goldschmidt's campaign for governor in 1986. As of today, we don't know what gubernatorial campaigns he'll be advising in the future. Please join me in welcoming Bill Scott.
Well, when I agreed to speak on this topic, and I titled my remarks "The Challenge of Change," I didn't realize that this would be Mary's last day, and I certainly didn't realize that the governor would be making the kind of announcement that she made this morning. But in a way, it just sort of proves the point that I'm going to make to you, which is that everything's going faster and you can't count on anything, and there is something going on in the world today that is very hard to cope with. And I think that's the cause of a lot of the problems we have, is that we are having trouble coping with it. And I hope today to spend a little time giving, I guess, a personal view from my point of view of what is going on, and maybe a little bit about what I think we should do about it. You hear some people are saying, and some of them are running for governor, that Oregon's economy is in the ditch, either overall or everywhere outside the metropolitan area. Others say Oregon's economy is great, and I'm basically here to tell you that it's both. I originally intended to spend most of my time telling you what we need to do about it, but as I thought about this talk and listened to people's confusion about what's going on, I decided to spend a little more time on the nature of the challenge. But I promised to get to the subject of what to do, and I'll tell you in advance that I'm pretty hopeful, but we have a very big challenge to rise to. The economy is a series of good news, bad news kind of statements. The good news, for instance, is that we have strong growth in personal income in Oregon. The bad news is that real per capita income is flat, and after 10 years continues to lag the national average. The good news is that jobs are growing in almost all of Oregon. The bad news is that in many parts of Oregon, the workforce is growing faster than jobs. There are special and major problems in many individual communities and all of Douglas County where they depend or depended until very recently on the supply of timber from federal and even from private lands. In those communities, the workforce is being forced to move or to accept much lower wage employment, even though net job growth in many cases is positive or flat. Good news is that Oregon, including its small and rural communities, is increasingly visible and attractive to employers and potential residents. The bad news is that many communities are dealing with skyrocketing housing costs, growing traffic, growing school populations, and infrastructure needs at the same time their high-wage jobs are leaving. The good news is that industry generally, and high-tech industries in particular, are ready to commit to investment at this point in the business cycle. The bad news is that banks and capitalists are still pretty cautious. Working capital in particular is hard for small businesses to come by. The good news is that Oregon has a very positive, well-respected policy direction in most areas. Economic development, of course, but also human services, education reform, health plan, growth management, resource management, and corrections and community policing. We have a living strategic economic plan, Oregon Shines, and the famous Oregon benchmarks. The bad news is that our institutions and plans have assumed a continuing level of commitment to state government and school funding, and now we know that's a bad assumption. The good news is that everyone knows Oregon is a great place to live. The bad news is that we're learning that we share the problems of rising juvenile violence, poverty, and social division that plague American life everywhere. And we're not as on top of growth management as we like to think we are. Overall, which is it? It really depends on how you feel about change, how well equipped you are to deal with change. Basically, the way I feel about change is nervous. The Oregon Values Survey shows that people feel insecure about jobs for themselves and for their children. They feel insecure about their personal safety. They feel insecure about the future livability of Oregon. As I already mentioned, there are good reasons to feel insecure about jobs and also about growth. A large number of Oregon jobs are permanently lost every year. Net job increase, we do have net job increases, but they're nearly matched by a steady immigration of workers who on average are better qualified than existing Oregonians. And the immigration itself can threaten livability. That's the challenge of change. I like to say that change today is the norm and adaptation is the issue. People want security, only competitiveness will bring it. Our mission at Economic Development is to help Oregon businesses be competitive, help them adapt to change. First, I think it helps to look at the non-governmental organizations that are facing the same choices. And perhaps Oregon's most visible business example is Tektronix. A few years ago, it became painfully obvious that Tek's customers were not going to pay the price for the kind of oscilloscopes the company was making. The competition the customers faced in their own businesses required that they have better test and measuring devices that cost less. Even if Tek explained that better equipment would cost more, it didn't help. If it couldn't supply better products for less, it was going out of business. Today, the company still isn't out of the woods, but it's going the right direction. And it sells more goods of better quality with less than 9,500 people than it did when it had 24,000. We government managers are quick to point out the differences between their situation and ours. But people I've talked to at Tektronix said that their managers had the same reasons why it couldn't be done there. The most important step is to stop saying we can't do it and start saying we have to. Oregon's taxpayers are a lot like Tek's customers. Their lives have become more challenging. Their jobs are less secure, so they have to save more. Their jobs are more demanding, so they have to invest more in their own training and education. They can't afford to give the same share of their earnings to state and local government that they used to. And in any event, they've refused to. That doesn't mean they've given up their dreams for a better state and better government services and better education. But they have challenged us to do it for less. You've probably noticed, if you're like me, that this pattern isn't confined to business and government. I was in a meeting at my church a couple of weeks ago where the theme was that the congregation seems to expect more but be willing to pay less. As chairman of the board of the Oregon Symphony, I can tell you that our audiences and our donors expect more music in greater variety at better prices. And of course, we're doing it. You'll hear the same at the Red Cross or United Way, and especially at universities and hospitals. Why? I believe that there are a few compelling interrelated trends that are driving the need in every walk of life for better performance and better use of resources. First, the information revolution. Actually, a guy named Michael Rothschild, who spoke in Portland a few months ago, says that this is the fourth information revolution. The first was when the Cro-Magnons learned to use notation and the Neanderthals couldn't do it. And there was a great deal of economic dislocation all over the world for a long time. I wish this were a joke. The second was when the Sumerians invented writing. The third, the Gutenberg press, which really led to the Industrial Revolution. Mr. Rothschild's point was that the fourth information revolution was when the microprocessor was invented at Intel in 1971. It's changing the cost structure of industry after industry. It makes it possible to really put into practice our understanding of the learning curve as a predictable competitive weapon. Just as an aside, too often we in government behave as if we've never heard of the learning curve and don't expect ourselves to take advantage of the incredible tools at our disposal to do everything better and faster. The learning curve says that every doubling of experience makes possible a predictable reduction in cost. Like the printing press or writing, the microprocessor made possible a stunning reduction in the time required to learn from the experience of others or from one's own experience by making calculations and so on. The second major trend is globalization. Some argue that this is just a side effect of the information revolution, but whether or not it's an independent phenomenon, nobody argues seriously that it isn't happening. Hewlett-Packard makes choices whether to expand in Corvallis, Ireland, Israel, or Singapore. A mill in Lakeview is making moldings from Chilean lumber. The factory down the street competes with factories in Mexico, Germany, and Malaysia. The standard for efficient government and education services is inevitably a global standard. If we are doing worse than the world's most efficient economy in any area, we're putting our workers, our citizens, and our businesses at a disadvantage. Third, population growth. Ultimately, that's the driver of the resource shortages that are cutting logging and mill employment in Oregon. It puts pressure on us to use everything more effectively, to waste less, to get things right the first time, to plan better. Bottom line, the pressure to do more with less isn't just a passing voter fad, and it isn't going to go away. We who are involved as employees or volunteer leaders in the public sector in Oregon have arrived at our particular crossroads where we either learn to do better for less or allow our dreams of inclusive prosperity to wither. Oregon has lost ground relative to the rest of the country in per capita income since 1980. The reason is fairly straightforward. Many of the jobs we used to have, even more than other states, were high wage, low skill. You could drop out of high school and get a job in the mill or the woods or the fishing boat that was almost as good as your dad's job. You could support a family, buy a house, and so on. Those jobs are just about all gone. The jobs we're creating to replace them are probably more heavily balanced toward higher skill jobs with far more professional and managerial jobs, but none of the jobs we're creating are low skill, high wage jobs. If they're low skill, they're low wage. The only source of rising incomes is rising productivity. Until recently, we and even our global competitors in Europe and Japan had in effect a social compact to pay people more than their true value to the economy and employ more people than the economy really required. We can't get away with it anymore. We can't afford it. Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore have arrived. China no longer voluntarily removes its population from competing in the world market. Japan can't afford it either. Its leaders know that the American consumer economy has run out of slack, and Japan must consume as well as produce in order to maintain some growth. So there are no longer consumers anywhere able and willing to pay a higher price. Since it's no longer possible to incorporate unnecessary labor costs in the price of products and services, we either have to subsidize excess labor through government transfer payments, welfare, extended unemployment, and the like, or we need to make everybody productive in the economy. So the solution, I think, is that we have to go as far as we can to make everybody productive that we possibly can, because if we don't, we pay the price one way or another. We have to get people to work. We still, even if we don't get a sales tax, we still have a personal income tax. We need to increase personal income. Obviously, there are benefits to the Oregon economy to go from around 12% of personal income taken by state and local government, which is where we were in 1990, to about 10%, which is where we'll be when we come out the other end of the next 2 years of ballot measure 5. Almost all of that reduction has gone to business. During the same period, the cost of workers' compensation and unemployment insurance per worker has also fallen. This should make it easier for business to create jobs, and therefore for people to support themselves. At the same time, it makes it harder for the state to support people in prison or on welfare, or to pay the costs of poor health practices. So far, it sounds like this should be a good trade-off. More people at work, less on the dole. But there are a couple of problems with this. First, California can send us people faster than we can create jobs, no matter how well we do. For instance, Salem had some of the state's highest job growth last year, but still both the absolute number of unemployed and the unemployment rate grew in Salem because the workforce grew even faster. There's lots of evidence that the people immigrating to Oregon are more competitive for the high-skilled jobs being created than the Oregonians who are having trouble joining or rejoining the ranks of the employed. Therefore, it's not enough just to create lots of jobs, or even to create lots of high-skill, high-wage jobs. We also have to help the people who need jobs gain competitive skills and connect them to the jobs being created. That's we get to kind of my motto for the department, or a short form of its mission, is more and better jobs for Oregonians. The second problem is that the same Measure 5 that gives us, presumably makes it easier to create jobs, also gives us less of the resources that schools, community colleges, and higher education use to prepare people for jobs. It makes the crux of our challenge the very best use of the resources available to support job creation, job connections, and job preparation. And this is something we have to do. We spent some time a week ago today with Bud Hodgkinson, who's a demographer that a number of you have probably been exposed to, who reminded me that it costs us about $25,000 a year to keep somebody in prison in Oregon. welfare recipients are pretty cheap, or they're about the same as university students at around $6,000 a year. And the K-12 student or the community college student is in the $4,000 to $5,000 a year range. Our best investment is in school, not prisons, and we need to find a way to have that investment be effective and to keep making it. The governor told you a couple of weeks ago, and we'll all be hearing a lot more about the imperative of greatly improving the systems by which the community promotes jobs, family strength, health, and public safety. And we'll be paying special attention to the relationships among these independent goals. But my special responsibility is jobs, and within the broad goal of job creation, job preparation, and job connections, we in economic development focus on job creation. Specifically, we have to focus on creating enough of the right kind of jobs and doing it in a way that makes it easy for unemployed Oregonians and the young Oregonians coming up through our schools to get the jobs. In the first place, of course, jobs are not created by state officials in Salem, or at least not anymore. They have to be created by individual private businesses in local communities all over Oregon. This obvious fact suggests the question, what then can the state government do, if anything, to help? First, I'd like to report that one of the most pleasant things about going to work in the state government this year or last year has been to realize, as I guess I should have known, that Oregon is a national model in economic development, as in so many policy areas. And when I meet with my counterparts around the country, I realize that they would be thrilled to have the tools and the program and the kind of support from the legislature that we have in Oregon. Over many years, our legislature and our governors have been on the leading edge of thinking about the subject and have scanned the world for the best practices, and where good models haven't been found, we've created them. Our policy development culminated in the strategic plan adopted in 1989 called Oregon Shines, which adopts the posture that economic development is mostly about getting the fundamentals right in the community, social, and physical and business environment, and the state should focus on that. That plan highlights the main goal of higher personal income for Oregonians with three main strategies: the nation's and the world's best workforce, a superior quality of life, and a global way of thinking. It also recommends increasing use of partnerships to achieve measurable results, maintaining high-quality public services and infrastructure at a reasonable cost, and finally, a focus on key industries with high potential. Finally, the plan called for the creation of what is now the Oregon Progress Board to monitor and advocate for implementation of its strategies. The main vehicle has been the Oregon benchmarks, now being copied around the country, which publish for all to see exactly where Oregon stands on its lofty goals. The benchmark movement is now spreading to the community level around the state, including the Portland-Multnomah County Progress Board created by Vera Katz and Bev Stein. So we have a very good, and I think a durable, understanding of our basic positioning. And Oregon Shines and the Oregon benchmarks have given some real discipline to decision-making in many public and private organizations. We've made progress in many of the prescriptions of Oregon Shines, and there are lots of efforts and accomplishments in workforce development, quality of life. We've eliminated our worst barrier to business growth, which was our sky-high workers' compensation costs. And I could give several speeches on the challenges and opportunities still ahead of us. But today I want to come down to a level a little closer to business and the specific role of the Economic Development Department. While we are certainly part of designing and implementing the big strategies that involve the big parts of government, our main job is the specific one of actually landing the new jobs. To those who argue that government should only concentrate on getting the fundamental business environment right, education and quality of life and so on, and that's one school of thought we deal with in the legislature particularly. And then we have another school of thought that says we should be, chasing more recruiting jobs. I say again, you have to do both. If you have to choose between sending your kid to college and helping her look for a job, it probably makes sense to send her to college. But sooner or later, she still has to look for a job. And that's what we do. How? Just like tech or any business faced with the challenge of change, the place to begin to decide that is with our customers. Our ultimate business customers, the Oregon companies which may or may not create jobs, have repeatedly identified certain major challenges they face in order to grow employment. Access to financing, access to markets, access to technology, availability of adequately skilled workers, taxes and regulation that make it hard to compete, availability of adequate transportation, sewer, water, communications, energy, and other infrastructure. The State Economic Development Department has been given nearly $90 million in lottery revenues in more than 30 separate programs designed to address every one of these issues. But in most cases, we do not provide such things to individual businesses, either directly or indirectly, although in some cases we do, for instance, international trade assistance, some direct lending, and certain consulting services. Generally, we're wholesalers, not retailers. And we're making a major new effort to change from organizing our activities around our specific programs to organizing around the way our customers see the world, which is basically two ways: industries and communities. We have two programs that are fundamentally organizers, and we are using them to organize all our programs. They are called Key Industries and Regional Strategies, and you may have heard of them. The Key Industries program picks up on Oregon Shines and has worked with each of the 13 key industries designated by the legislature to get trade associations organized where none existed, to help them articulate a vision for growth in Oregon, complete with benchmarks, and to agree on an action plan for removing barriers to growth. The Regional Strategies program organizes the state's communities into multi-county regions, each of which is asked to produce an economic development strategy aligned with its comprehensive land use plan, its workforce strategy, its affordable housing strategy, and so on, and focusing on a few of the state's key industries. Our department's commitment is to use these strategies to focus all the resources of all our programs on these regional industry strategies. For instance, we might market our export assistance services to environmental services firms in the Roseburg area if that industry is selected for concentration there, as it has been. Or we work with our partners to organize training for bankers in South Central Oregon to lending to the secondary wood products industry, taking advantage of the state and federal programs that enhance the credit of smaller firms. We're reviewing the action plans of each of our key industries to identify high priorities for improvement in the tax and regulatory climate that need attention from state agencies or legislatures, focusing on those where we can make things easier for business without compromising occupational or consumer safety or environmental standards. We're brokering partnerships between a consortium of semiconductor manufacturers and a number of community colleges and universities to help both entry-level and advanced curricula that will be standard throughout Oregon. We'll co-sponsor this spring a summit meeting between our key industry organizations and the state's educational institutions to cement commitments to partnerships to respond to the industry's highest education, training, and research priorities. In fact, when you get down to it, a lot of what we do is organizing. In many cases, our role is to help industry be specific about its needs, whether they involve financing, services, or education, or to establish the relationship between industry associations and service providers that can work for the benefit of business. We also act as a packager of municipal infrastructure loans and grants, using some lottery money we control, but also helping Oregon communities access federal funds and private financial markets to carry out projects that are top priorities for regional or local strategies. And I guess maybe to illustrate that point, one of the most hopeful things I've seen recently, and you'll hear some cynicism about it, but I don't have any, is the Clinton administration's Northwest Economic Adjustment Initiative, the economic side of the forest plan, where really we've got this group called the State Community Economic Response Team, composed of federal, state, local, and private sector people, who are really focusing on the needs of each of our communities and packaging federal and state resources and local resources. For instance, in the project we just had to bring Sony to Springfield, we had federal, state, and local resources, some of them coming from the forest plan to do that. And it's really a different way of doing business, and we've had great luck with the federal agencies to sit down and work on a project and say, how can we put all our different categorical programs together to make this work? This is something that we've tried to do in Oregon for a while, but we've never had the federal agencies at the table like we do right now. Going on to business services, we try to organize the many providers of service to increase the ease of access of Oregon's small businesses, especially in the key industries, to public and private sources of help. Increasingly, these include organizations like the Oregon Enterprise Forum and the Oregon Quality Initiative that we may have had a hand in organizing, but that are fundamentally supported and led by industry. And we're really moving toward a system where everything economic development does is led by industry or led by local community leaders. Just one aside about small business, it's a cliche that 96% of Oregon businesses, and that doesn't even count sole proprietorships, employing more than 50% of the workforce are small. It's important, though, to note that the big businesses employ about half the workers, but they also represent the main market for many small businesses, and they act as standard setters, windows on global competition, essentially as the anchors of many of our key industries. So we need to pay special attention to their needs too, both existing big businesses and new entrants into our community. For instance, we didn't spend the years of work required to recruit the Sony compact disc plant that will locate in Springfield just for the jobs it directly creates. Not that 300 potentially growing to 2,000 jobs at close to 30,000 a year is anything to take lightly. But we already have calls from at least 3 Sony suppliers looking for sites in Oregon. And then there's their suppliers of everything from robots to laundry service. Plus, this cements Oregon's image as a high-tech manufacturing location and establishes the entire Willamette Valley as a known site. We've even had other Oregon communities restored to a short list because the prospective company figured Sony must know what it's doing. There are, of course, similar stories about Intel, Hewlett-Packard, Precision Castparts, Boeing, and other big companies. Bottom line, our large and small businesses need each other. We need both, and we're especially committed to increasing the connections between them. We're at a major turning point in Oregon. We've all seen it coming for a long time. We've done a lot to get ready for it. It's not a surprise, but it still is pretty stunning. The news was formally delivered in November of 1993 when the people of Oregon voted against the sales tax to make up the shortfall of revenue predicted for the 1995-97 biennium based on final implementation of Measure 5. It was confirmed last week, or 2 weeks ago, by Governor Roberts in her State of the State speech here, when she said, "We need to plan for a future with the money we have. That is the state of the state. That is reality." Basically, within that reality, we have a choice. We can permit all our services to become a little more mediocre, or we can rise to the challenge of change. We can use this opportunity to get really clear about what our citizen customers want, which is work, and how important that is. Focus all our resources on the things that will help our companies compete, create good jobs, and do everything in our power to see that enough of those jobs go to the Oregonians who otherwise are costing our tax dollars. That's the challenge. I find it exhilarating, not daunting. I believe we can meet it. Thank you.
Jim Zarin, and then George Boudreau, and then other City Club members as time permits.
Thank you, Mary. Bill, I'm tempted to ask you how exhilarating it is to take a job as a state agency head in April of one year and in the third year of a governor's term, and then find out in January of the fourth year that she's not going to run for re-election. But I won't. What I would like to do is ask you to comment further on something that you touched on at several points in your remarks, and it relates to the role of growth and responding to growth and how that relates to our economy. And let me give you a couple pieces of that. If you could comment on these, I'd appreciate it. As I recall, in Oregon Shines, there's a fairly major theme about one of the strongest strategic advantage that Oregon has as a state is the special quality of life we have here, the quality of our natural environment, the quality of our communities, et cetera. That's one of the best things we have going. And so I'd like you to comment on how much you agree with that, how much in your position you found that to really be the case in terms of the growth that's coming here, and especially migration-oriented growth. And then as a follow-up to that, what do you say to those Oregonians, I'm sure many in this room, who are concerned about how well we are equipped to deal with growth? Are we going to, kill the goose that laid the golden egg? And especially, what do you say to those people who say, in a classic Oregon fashion, I don't want to grow. I just don't want to grow. I'm here because I like quality of life, and if we grow, we're going to end up like every place else.
Maybe I'll take a second to answer the question you stated but didn't ask. I feel great about this job. I'm having more fun than I've ever had in my life, and I've had some really fun jobs. I have. And I would like to tell you that that Barbara Roberts is the best person I ever worked for, and has done more to bring a holistic way of looking at this problem to this government than anybody else. And her participation in all aspects of economic development and in the deals that we've been working on has been right along extremely proactive, and she's really good at it. I don't believe that Oregon is going to drop the ball because we changed governors. We've done that before. The last transition, I think we had a solid enough policy foundation laid in economic development to maintain it. Despite what you hear some of the candidates saying, I think we have an even stronger economic development policy foundation laid today. And I think when the new governor learns what's going on and supplies the input that I'm sure they'll have, that we'll end up with an even stronger policy, and I don't think we'll drop the ball. Quality of life is an advantage. It's just, I mean, this is no longer even discussable. I think it was an arguable point maybe when 5 or 10 years ago, when it was a theory but you couldn't put it in practice. If you ask Intel why it's now bigger in Oregon than anywhere else and it's growing fast here, they'll say because this is the easiest place to recruit and retain graduate engineers of the places they operate. If you ask Sony why they located in Springfield, Oregon instead of the alternate places, they'll give you the same kind of an answer. So certainly for the companies moving in from out of state, it's an important fact. And I think if you talk to Oregon businesses, you'll get a similar version of that answer. Why are they expanding here instead of going somewhere else? It's basically because they have high quality workforce, low turnover, and that's partly because we have good schools and a highly educated population, which we do, but it's also because nobody wants to leave. And that makes this an easy place to grow. So I totally agree with that. How well are we dealing with the growth issue? I'm worried. I think that the answers to this are largely going to be at the local level in terms of local and regional actors making very good plans for how they handle growth. I think economic development, both at the state and the local level, can do our part by really cooperating. And this goes back to a theme of my speech that I couldn't be more dead serious about, which is that if we don't pay attention to making the unemployed people of Oregon competitive for these jobs, the jobs are going to come, and they need to come, and they will the biggest thing we can do, I think, is to prepare our people so that we can grow with the people we have instead of having to import people in order to retain the kind of institutions and personal income in the state that we would like to have.
New member of City Club. I appreciate that you spoke briefly on the reference to the access to technology, and I'd like to refresh your memory. You probably know all about this, but 30 years ago, Governor Luther Hodges in North Carolina established the Research Triangle. And the way he was able to do this was because he had a cluster of very strong universities. Now, how do you feel that you can sort of follow this model, if you wish, and still have universities that are supposed to be tightening their belts in the next few years?
Well, I had an interesting conversation. I'm losing a name here. I had an interesting conversation recently with a distinguished official from the University of Oregon who basically, and this is somebody with a lot of experience outside the state, who said, we're a better university than we were 5 years ago when we had a much higher percentage of tax support at the University of Oregon, and I have no question that we're going to be a better university 5 years from now with even less tax support than we are now. And it's a matter of getting focused, being responsive to industry, and just, you know, listening to your customers and getting down to business. It's the same issue, I think, for the universities as what I'm talking about for the state generally. We have very fine universities here, and we have a cluster of them. I think just this Sony decision to go to Eugene helps increasingly make us think of sort of high tech as a Willamette Valley phenomenon that can stretch certainly from the University of Oregon to the cluster of higher education institutions in Portland. We need to think of it whole, and we need to think of how that system can really make much better connections to our industries. I'm not downplaying the financial challenges involved, but I don't think that that excellence in the universities is something that can't be achieved with the resources we have.
Bob Wheel, member. Bill, in a report in the Oregonian this morning, a candidate for governor, who shall be nameless, attacked your department because you were trying to get Mitsubishi to come into the state. And his criticism was that this would be competition for an established business. In your opinion, is it a proper function for the department to build a wall around the state and keep out competition for businesses that are here?
Sounded like a yes or no question to me. No. Actually, the candidate, I'd be delighted to brief him on, and actually that isn't a case that the state is involved in, but I think that generally our industries feel that growth of their industries here, particularly the industries that are exporting from Oregon rather than exploiting the Oregon market, are happy to have competitors join them in our environment.
Roger Smith, Chair of the Arts and Culture Standing Committee. What role is the Oregon Arts Commission going to play now that it's part of the Economic Development Commission?
That's a great question. We're working on it. Currently, I've been really, I think, intrigued since we've been having Leslie Toomey, who's the director of the Arts Commission staff, attend our staff meetings and so on, how many ideas she's brought to us for not where we can help the arts, but where the arts can help us by being part of our marketing efforts and part of our business development efforts. I think the arts are a very important part of positioning Oregon, and I think that this is going to be a great partnership.
I know there are other questions, but I think we'll have to call this to a conclusion. I think that the scope and content of Bill's remarks are reflective of the versatility that he brings to this job and all the other roles he's taken on a volunteer and professional basis. And will you join me, please, in thanking him for his guest today? We're adjourned.